Good evening, everybody. This evening's seminar will take off from where we started in the previous seminar, which took off from the beginning of the seminar prior to that, and that was proceeding. You will recall our recent interest in the archaeology of post-colonial predecessors of current iterations of what we have been provisionally, and always only provisionally, indexing as contemporary subaltern praxis. In resisting the hegemonic strategy to hijack the subaltern, we have considered embodied maneuvers aimed at inverting the scopic regime, and thereby that regime's obsession with imbricating the subaltern in the matrix of power and exploitation. Today, we need to turn our attention towards the situatedness of the particularities that simultaneously construct and deconstruct varying formulations of academic knowledge with an eye towards how the performance of authority, so ruthlessly demanded of post-colonial scholars by the eroding structural conditions of the Academy in the United States, might serve as the very front in which to advance embattled conceptualizations of art and its relation to politics. To shamelessly invoke Gayatri Spivak's question and battle cry, can the subaltern speak? We will proceed for the next few minutes to interrogate the discursive formations that invest academic knowledge with authority, en route towards reckoning with ways in which that authority could be contested through languages that resist logocentric Western epistemologies and that convene context for the subaltern to contest her overdetermination within the context of multiculturalism and all of the insidious imperative of assimilation that such rhetoric and policy violently asserts. In our evening sojourn into the aesthetic underground, we will keep in our sights how the subaltern is perpetually enframed in performative modalities, which for their very efficacy must seek out responsive strategies in navigating the cusp between the fraught terrains of personal, artistic, and political visions on one side and the global mandates of capital on the other. This, of course, includes the subaltern's ironic engagement with capital's co-optation of the democratizing discourses of higher education in the United States, encapsulated succinctly under the slogan of diversity. And it goes without saying that among the subaltern's subversive tactics is to eschew solitary rumination in favor of dialogue and collaboration with other subalterns. She never acts alone, she does not have to. But let's not digress. When we speak about art making and politics, we first need to address the ways in which certain forms of expressive culture come to be defined as art, while other modes of creativity are doomed to reside under the inferior designations of the folkloric, the ritualistic, and the traditional. Here, of course, is implied and often explicitly declared that non-Western cultural production ineluctably belongs to the latter, existing only ever as a rubric by which to measure and affirm the West as emblematic of modernity and innovation. Non-Western cultural production is allowed entrance through the hallowed gates of the sanctioned places of scholarly and artistic capital only as it can be posited as antithetical to the modern, as a kind of elegant anachronism to be valued only ever as the souvenir of colonial spoil, or, at the very best, as the feminized labor of the titillating, exotic other. With this in mind, I would ask you now, what might be a salient and unruly object for our attention at this juncture? India. Indian theater. Traditional Indian theater has much to offer for those interested in contemporary performance. Traditional Indian theater has much to offer for those interested in contemporary performance.
Let me clarify. By contemporary performance. What do I mean by contemporary performance? Here I refer to references that refer to those who refer to the contemporary as exploratory, investigative, experimental. Theater that seeks to experiment with the theatrical form. Theater that seeks to investigate the theatrical form. Theater that seeks to explore the theatrical
Pause.
form.
Traditional
Did
Indian
you know that there is a long history of Western theater artists who have looked to India for inspiration? Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Konstantin Stanislavski, Ruth St. Denis, Jerzy Grotowski, Peter Brook, Eugenio Barba, Richard Schechner, Paul Taylor, Pina Bausch, Ariel Mushkin, Madhu Mines, and Marc Morris. What they saw in Indian theater, or better said, what they understood of what they saw in Indian theater, is a question.
It's a political question. It's a political question about longer histories of fantasies in the West about India. And it's a political question about longer histories of the systems of knowledge the West created for knowing India and ruling over her. And it's a political question about longer histories of the West's appropriation of the cultural materials of non-Western others on terms of inevitably unequal exchange. But let's not digress.
Pause. Traditional Indian theater. Like all great art, Indian theater is about seeking truth. To this end, the ancient Sanskrit treatise on performance, the Natya Shastra, explains that all of nature and all of human life
that is the world of Lokadharmi.
Is worthy of truthful depiction in theater.
That is the world of Natya Dharmi.
Lokadharmi
and Natya Dharmi.
Lokadharmi
and Natya Dharmi.
Lokadharmi
and Natya Dharmi.
And Natya Dharmi.
In the Indian view of theater, realism does not hold exclusive rights over this truth. Lokadharmi is distinct from Natya Dharmi. The world is represented, but not in the language in which we live it.
In the Indian view of theater, realism is a theater of the absurd because everyone who participates in it knows that it isn't real. In the Indian view of theater, realism is a theater of the absurd because what the five senses declare to be real all day long is nothing but one night in the cosmic sleep of the Creator.
In the Indian view of theater, theater is a dream. Inside a dream, 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 inside a dream. In the Indian view of theater, theater requires a special language. And what might be the nature of this special language?
Surely it should be a language capable of inscribing great truth. A language that acknowledges that metaphor, poetry, and symbol have expressive powers, magical expressive powers, capable of conveying a truth that exceeds the limits of the rational and efficient use of language in everyday life.
And what might be the nature of the truth that this special language describes?
Surely it should be a truth that acknowledges all things are relative and dependent upon the eye of the beholder. It should be a truth that illustrates that things are never as we think they are. It should be a truth that recognizes that all beings are animated by contradictory impulses. And it should be a truth that reveals that everything that happens is a result of the meaning
and play of opposing
forces. Indian theater performs a truth that
Indian theater performs a truth which reminds us on some level higher than our own. These opposing forces are one and the same thing. What do you do? You know, you're supposed to do the gesture. I do this, and then you put your hand up in the air and you throw the paper.
How in the hell am I supposed to do the gesture? You're grabbing my hand, you practically twisted it off. You want your gesture? Okay, here's your gesture.
Traditional Indian theater has much to offer for those interested in contemporary performance because it provides insights and techniques into the development of a theatrical language of truth, which allows for multiple layers of meaning and multiple perspectives on the same thing. Traditional Indian theater has much to offer because it provides insights and techniques into the development of a theatrical language of truth, which allows for multiple layers of meaning and multiple perspectives on the same thing. Traditional Indian theater has much to offer for those interested in contemporary performance because it provides insights and techniques into the development of a theatrical language of truth, which allows for multiple layers of meaning and multiple perspectives on the same thing. Indian theater suggests ways in which multiple elements can be brought together and pulled apart in seeking truth. Multiple elements that communicate together, and multiple elements that communicate independently. Yeah? But what does this mean exactly?
What does this mean exactly?
What are you doing? You know, you said that you do a demonstration of whatever it is that you do. So why don't you just do that? What? The ancient sense Sanskrit text, the Natya Shastra, observes the theater is composed of 4 distinct parts. There is Vachika, word, speech, dialogue, music, poetry. costume, makeup, accessory. There's Abhinaya, acting. There is Angika, movement, dance, acrobatics. Okay, that's enough. Hey, look, that's enough. Hey, it's enough! That's enough! Stop!
Oh my God, well, I'm exhausted.
What? What are you doing?
I'll just finish this lecture, okay?
Oh. You're going to finish the lecture now. All right. Let me ask you something. Do you really think that anybody here cares about any of this?
Would you please just sit down?
Excuse me.
These four... These four components of theatrical language are in continuous conversation. They combine and recombine in innumerable ways. Each of these narrative lines is speaking. Each of these narrative lines has something to say. Sometimes they are in harmonious conversation, and in others in collaborative dissonance. Would you please sit down? They are all rooted in the body, but from the point of view that physical experience and psychological experience operate in union. There is no division between the mind and the body. There is no division between the body and the mind. The mind lives throughout the body, and the body is the repository and source for all emotional experience. The actor's psychophysical capabilities thus become essential for elaborating forms of mimesis that are both precise and multivalent. To this end, the various forms of traditional performance in India are based in techniques for channeling the energy of the actor and for rigorously developing the actor's physical capability of emotional expression, as well as her capacity for improvisation, her clarity of portrayal in the context of nonlinear narrative, and her ability to fashion and refashion the relationship between the elements of storytelling. Now, surely these skills are paramount for developing the kind of theatrical representation that artists, presenters, and audiences in the United States glorify and underfund as experimental, exploratory, investigative, and avant-garde. Although with respect to this final term, I would invoke performance artist Guillermo Gomes Peña's declaration, quote, "Today's avant-garde is no longer advancing from the front, but operating from the margins," unquote. Please note that in all that we have briefly identified here as ancient in the Indian context is postmodern in the West, and I would postulate even queer, inasmuch as performativity does not seek invisibility, and multiplicity is celebrated over singular and clearly demarcated senses of both truth and pleasure. And secondly, please note that in all that we have humbly and perhaps clumsily tried to embody, truth and pleasure are not antithetical. Thank you. Thank you all for coming here today. We'd like to open this up now for your questions. This is a piece that we're going to continue working on. Mark.
You need to perform.
So, yeah, it's a piece that we're going to continue working on, and so we'll really appreciate your comments and feedback. We're calling what you saw here today To the Academy.
Does anyone know the reference to the title To the Academy? Yes, you're shaking your head. It's
To the Moon, the Honeymooners?
No! Oh, but thank you. We never thought of that. Yes, thank you, Professor. It's a very famous short story called report to the Academy by Franz Kafka. And, well, some of you may not know the story, but it's basically about this ape who addresses a group of scientists and talks about his identity and his experiences as an experimental subject and as an artifact in the collection of specimens. He observes to these scientists that humans seem to construct him in their idea of what his world represents. And he also notes to the scientists that human interaction seems motivated by a need to affirm the human world as central, as if this ape's world, if he were anywhere else, but in a cage, that their world would be under siege. So that's where it comes from. This started when I was asked to do a TED Talk-like, yes, called lecture, as one of some events at a fundraiser for an academic department.
Now, the purpose of these events at this fundraiser, and by the way, the events included the usual things you can imagine, like showcasing student work, that sort of thing. And the point of all this, obviously, was to showcase the department's curriculum and also its accomplishments. And I was a new faculty member in that department at that time. I hadn't even been there a year. In fact, all this took place during my first semester there. And, you know, I don't know, when you're in a place for your first semester, you feel obligated to do a lot of things, right? But somehow I found myself feeling somehow kind of uncomfortable with the request. Oh boy, right. Yeah. I did that pretty fast. First of all, I found the idea stupid.
I mean, who the hell wants to listen to a fucking academic lecture in a windowless room where graduate classes take place after hours and with a glass of wine in their hand?
God. This beyond the fact that supposedly this TED Talk-like lecture was going to showcase what I do, and I don't lecture. I guide students to ask questions and interrogate what they believe knowledge to be.
The Socratic method.
Oops. A reference from the Western canon. Hey, post-colonials can cite Socrates too, you know. But actually, he's someone I think about a lot more these days because look what happened to him, and nowadays you never know who might. Or you.
Let's not digress.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't serve up sound bites, and I really don't subscribe to the whole TED Talk way of doing it.
If you want some reflection on TED Talks, try Marty Robbins' plain talking critique in the September 10th, 2012 issue of the New Statesman.
Yep. The world of TED is inspirational and awesome, and ideas aren't meant to be challenged.
This whole context for this fucking fundraiser was a problem. I don't do fundraisers.
I'm committed to the belief that a public education should be publicly funded. Oh, hello. And I support the public institution 7 days a week, working morning, noon, and night for my students, and also in the hope of one day achieving some kind of job security in the name of tenure. You know, that weird kind of exploitation meted out to the few of us who have the luck of having a tenure-track job to begin with.
If the institution is actually a public one, I shouldn't have to participate in marketing schemes to keep the fucking department's roof from collapsing.
Just the other day, I was told that I needed to dust off my entrepreneurial skills to figure out how to passionately keep the public good mission of the university.
Last time I checked, you don't have any skills to dust off.
Oh. But that's not even what made me feel most uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, that's not what made me feel the most uncomfortable. Right.
What made me feel the most uncomfortable was feeling that I was being trotted out as representative of the department's breadth of offer.
That I was being trotted out as exemplary of the department's global perspective.
That I was being trotted out as indicative of the department's multiculturalism.
That I was being trotted out as evidence of the department's inclusivity.
That I was being trotted out as undeniable proof
of the department's diversity.
Funny thing though, no one in the department knew what I did.
They had never asked me.
In fact, when they did talk about what I did, they frequently talked about things I didn't actually do.
Okay. I am not a katakali performer.
I'm not a man-eater. I'm not a man-eater. I'm not a sausage hound. Well, the point is, the point that they didn't actually teach about what I did do.
Well, this is beginning to sound like sour grapes.
I acknowledge that. But I'm just saying that all of a sudden I came to understand what it means to be
Da-da-da!
the non-Western hire. Who's that? That's the person that an academic department in a relatively culturally myopic discipline such as theater hires to cover all forms of theater ever invented in the history of humankind, including any and all areas of the world that culturally myopic people deem as largely irrelevant to the real work that gets done.
The real work of getting students jobs.
To the real work of real theater. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not blaming culturally myopic individuals. We're talking about the field as a whole. Did you know that a survey of 12 commonly used textbooks on theater history shows that content about anything outside of Euro-America doesn't exceed 10%, and in some cases is as little as 4%? And did you know that of 21 anthologies of drama commonly used in courses about world theater, only 4 include any plays from Asia? And did you know that almost all courses on theater in the departments that require academic classes as part of the curriculum have next to no significant non-Western content whatsoever?
So, there I was.
Ta-da.
The non-Western hire.
Trotted out at the gala.
Trotted out like that ape.
This is starting to sound like sour grapes.
I acknowledge that.
By the way, everyone, this section of the piece that you're seeing now is completely new, okay? We're trying it out in front of an audience for the very first time.
Yeah, you're our experimental specimens. Our apes.
So to make a long story short,
To spare you the details.
to prepare for the gala, I did the only thing that I could do. The only thing a faculty member knows to do.
I found a collaborator. Someone to do exactly what I told them to do. A graduate student in the department.
Another ape.
The two of us began work on what you saw through an interesting process that dislodged the text. That dislodged the text as the original point of genesis for performance material. But that's the kind of thing that you can ask us about in the Q&A.